Our contribution of the AZE Netherlands committee to this particular session is that I'll talk about the privately protected areas and their role for species conservation, particularly those private protected areas that are owned and managed by local NGOs. Sorry, can I go back to the first slide, please? Well, the rationale for us to step into this was the realization that public protected areas, around 2000 we started this program, public protected areas will never be enough to cover all the area conservation that is needed to achieve the 11 AZE target. So it could be for political, social reasons that the expansion of public areas has reached its limits. And also outside public protected areas, there's an awful lot of biodiversity left. So here is where private protected areas can play an important role. So the initiative we took in 2001 was motivated, inspired by grantee partners in the NGO community worldwide, which we had been supporting with regular projects, field projects for many years, and more of those NGOs, they indicated to us that their impact could be enhanced considerably if they would be able to buy pieces of land. There's a large difference for an NGO, its status in the area, if it is a landowner, as compared to just an organization that carries out a project for a few years. The trouble for us, or the challenge for us, was to find a donor who was willing to enable land purchase by NGOs. We did find that donor. A donor in our case was the Dutch National Postcode Lottery, which is, in a way, it's a private lottery, a private donor, of course, and it is, in fact, the second largest private donor, it seems, globally. They have a total fund budget of about $250 million a year. Okay, we use selection criteria, of course, both for organizations that can qualify as grantees. They must obviously have experience in managing areas. They must have adequate technical skills, and we use criteria for the land that is to be purchased. It should have outstanding natural values. It should have, it could have populations of endangered species or ecosystems that are underrepresented in a particular country, and areas that have a strategic importance. Of course, land purchase has only in itself is very limited locally. So it must have strategic importance in the sense that the local action to buy land and manage it as a conservation area has a much broader impact. Connectivity is one of the obvious criteria here. Well, a number of the aspects I just mentioned are listed here again. So far we have funded around 100 projects in almost 30 countries with a total surface area that is covered that is 80,000 hectares. But of course, as I indicated, the impact in terms of conservation results is much broader. It is unique in the sense, this SPN fund is unique in the sense that it's the only open window for NGOs to buy land. I mean, there are other organizations like the World Land Trust and the ABC, Association for Bird Conservation, that allow land purchase. But we have an open window, so NGOs from all over the world, they can submit proposals. Okay. This particularly applies to, or what makes it particularly unique is when it allows land purchase in countries for which conservation isn't mainstream, isn't that well developed anyway, and also where land ownership is still in, let's say, evolving rapidly. Like countries like Armenia and Iran, we have supported land purchase this year for the first time. In those countries, land that is owned by an NGO is something unique already. Obviously, the countries must have legislation that allows land ownership by NGOs to begin with. But so we have stepped in a number of countries where land purchase is quite exceptional. In the two cases I mentioned, Armenia and Iran, it both concerns or the species which are benefiting for the land purchase are the same. The main one being the Caucasian leopard. Of course, buying a few hundred hectares will not do too much about saving populations, but we nevertheless have enabled the land purchase because we expect the impact to be much larger. Partly because, for instance, the NGOs, they have considerable networks that have quite broad support in a wider region. And since the land purchase in both cases, camera traps, for instance, have shown a return or an increase of observations of a number of species besides the leopard itself. Here is the list of species around which land purchase has been centered. For our donor, the postcode lottery especially, they have to justify to the lottery ticket buyers where the money is going. Part of the entrance, part of the revenues for the lottery come, half of it goes to the prize winners of the lottery tickets, the other half goes to charities. So to the audience, I must justify these expenses, and keystone species, flagship species, can be very appealing. As I indicated before, when assessing proposals, we look at their strategic importance especially. We get about 10 times as much proposals than we have money available, so we can put the bar pretty high. So that allows us to really look at strategic added value of buying particular pieces of land. Well, this picture is very clear. It's in the northern Argentina, where you see urban sprawl, expansion of cities, and it's clear that between the two areas there's a very critical connection, which was purchased by a local NGO. And I know that since then the authorities, there were good relations between the NGOs and the authorities. They started building aqueducts, connections in that particular area where you see, I think you see some greenish connection still, so that has been purchased, but there has been constructed more to make sure that the road which is actually going through that area, the impacts of the road on the wildlife that moves back and forth is minimized. An important additional impact beyond just conserving a few hundred hectares is that it creates a foothold for an NGO in the area, like a conservation foothold. An NGO that goes to the table and negotiates with other stakeholders, that NGO which itself also is a landowner, has a much different position, is viewed by the other stakeholders with different eyes than just an NGO that is managing a project. It makes their position much stronger and makes them much more, in a way, added credibility to them in negotiations, for instance, with companies or large landowners that practice large-scale agriculture. Okay, well, finally, some success factors for operating with land purchase. Of course, the choice of the location is crucial, obviously. As I expressed several times now, the strategic importance of the location, not just the fact that there is some species still occurring there. Value impact beyond the area is maybe the first success factor. The second is commitment. Commitment of the local organization, not only to the area, also to the communities and local authorities, local stakeholders that interact with the conservation there. And third, for donors, it requires flexibility, flexibility and willingness to take risks. That means I'm talking now about our position as an intermediary donor. Land purchases are very complex and sometimes long processes where, as I said, certain risk can be involved, and many mainstream donors are simply too impatient or not flexible enough to step into these kinds of investments. Well, we did have 3 testimonials planned, or one of the 3 testimonials from people from those NGOs, but due to internet problems, I'm afraid we have to leave it here. The connection, I just tried it out before this session, the connection simply is not stable enough. But I hope that this has given a good impression of what we're doing here.